Hello, I'm here to ask you a favour before we begin this episode. I would really appreciate it if you could vote for Real Life Ghost Stories in the British Podcast Awards. Just go to britishpodcastawards.com/voting to cast your vote. You can vote once per email address and you have to verify your vote via email for it to count. It genuinely takes 30 seconds and you can vote from anywhere in the world. Am I likely to win? No. But do I enjoy turning a look at an event? Yes. And on a genuine note, it is such good free advertising for the podcast to have the name up there. So if you've enjoyed the podcast, if I've kept you company on a long journey, if I lull you to sleep at night with my dulcet tones, I would really appreciate if you could cast a little vote for Real Life Ghost Stories. And also, please do vote for any other indie podcasts that you listen to. The place to vote is britishpodcastawards.com/voting.
To everyone else, this is a task. But to you, it's a launch pad. Your starting block. This ain't a desk. This is opportunity.
Students who switch and save can get the Moto G 5G on us at your local Boost retailer.
The Boost mobile network includes roaming coverage from partner networks, which cover 99% of the U.S. population. Moto G 5G on us when you switch with ID verification and new $60 plan activation. Taxes extra. All prices, fees, features, functionality, and other offers are subject to change without notice. See participating dealers for details.
Welcome to episode number 242 of Real Life Ghost Stories. And to kick things off this week, I would like to say thanks to some of our newest Patreon subscribers. I would like to thank Kent Modesit, Jandy Prince, Project Peak, Hannah McCracken, Rebecca Babin, Kevin, Kim Amos, Jennifer Hopkins, Perry McKenna, Helen Toulson, Cindy Bittick, Angus McGalligan, Andy O'Sullivan, Emily Moretti, Kat Adair, Mandy, Kelly Ann Riley, Linz, David and Shelley Connor, and Unlucky Rabbit 420. Thank you so much for subscribing to the Patreon. I love you and appreciate you every single day. And our film review this week, our film review is Abigail. Abigail was released in 2024. It has 6.6 out of 10 on IMDb and 86% on Rotten Tomatoes. After a group of would-be criminals kidnap the 12-year-old ballerina daughter of a powerful underworld figure, all they have to do to collect a $50 million ransom is watch the girl overnight. In an isolated mansion, the captors start to dwindle one by one, and they discover to their mounting horror that they're locked inside with no normal little girl. And let me tell you, right, this film really surprised me. I watched it one morning a couple of weeks ago and I thought, I'm not going to like this. I did like it. I enjoyed it. It was fun. It was really silly, but it was very entertaining to watch. So I loved the kidnappers. Not a phrase that I would use very often. But I did love the kidnappers. They were this sort of like ragtag group who didn't know each other, and they were all interesting characters who, for the most part, controversially, considering I don't condone the kidnapping of children, I was rooting for them all to survive. I was like, come on, you're going to get through this. You're going to beat this little vampire gal. It's fine. Spoiler alert, they do not all, in fact, get through this. Dan Stevens is in this film, and I really liked his character. So I like Dan Stevens as an actor an awful lot. And when I say I liked his character, I sort of mean I loved to hate his character because he was just a self-serving bastard. And I love a film where you can just outright hate one of the characters. Makes me very happy. As an absolute aside, which will mean nothing to a lot of people, I'm currently watching the TV series The Boys. I don't know why I'm even watching it because it's really kind of on paper not my thing. It's very gory, very violent, very sexual. None of those things that I enjoy watching, but yet here I am glued to it. And I have never hated a character more than I hate the character of Homelander. Like, I hate him with a fiery passion. So that was just a little aside for you. And the little girl, right, that played Abigail was fabulous. You guys know my feelings about child actors that can't act. It's very annoying, very disconcerting. Annoys me when I'm watching a film. I'm like, get an actor who can act. She is Alicia Weir, and she was recently in Matilda and also Wicked Little Letters. She was so good. I mean, look, the film is ridiculous, and there's all of these moments where she is in her little ballerina outfit doing her little ballerina moves. Like, she'll be running down the corridor after somebody and all of a sudden she's pirouetting. You know, it's doing all that while ripping people apart. It was so stupid and so unnecessary, but so incredibly entertaining. There's this bit where she's doing a little routine, a little ballet routine with a dead body, and it's so stupid, and but I really enjoyed it. And in regards to the dislikes, to be honest, there weren't very many dislikes. There's nothing new or exciting in this film. Do you know what I mean? It's not trying to push the boundaries. It's definitely not a thinker. It's not trying to be cerebral or clever. It's just silly and funny and blood-soaked, and that might not be everybody's cup of tea. For me, it felt like it was along the same lines as the film Ready or Not. Also the film Megan, but I thought it was much better than Megan because I wasn't hugely enamoured with the film Megan. But that kind of same schlocky, camp, ridiculous, gory horror that is just very entertaining. I did think the last 20 minutes went off the rails a little bit, which is often the case with horror films. It often feels like the writers are sort of scrambling to tie everything together while also having a big climax. So the last 20 minutes I was a bit like, oh, boo earns, like, just die or don't die, you know, get on with it. This is very boring. Stop monologuing. I don't care about your feelings. And as a horror film, it's definitely not scary. But it is billed as a comedy horror, so it's definitely fun and funny. And if you liked films like Ready or Not, I do think that you will definitely like this. Oh, this is a very short and sweet film review, because I just don't have very much to say about it. I enjoyed it. What can I say? It was silly, it was fun, it was entertaining. I would suggest watching it with people. 4 stars for sheer entertainment value.
To everyone else, this is a desk. But to you, it's a launch pad. Your starting block. This ain't a desk. This is opportunity.
Students who switch and save can get the Moto G 5G on us at your local Boost retailer.
The Boost mobile network includes roaming coverage from partner networks, which cover 99% of the U.S. population. Moto G 5G on us when you switch with ID verification and new $60 plan activation. Taxes extra. All prices, fees, features, functionality, and other offers are subject to change without notice. See participating dealers for details.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, how to get 30, how to get 20, 20, 20, how to get 20, 20, how to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See detail.
Which brings us to our story this week. Now, our story this week, all of the information comes from a book called The Lady in the Bay Window by William C. Grave, which I will talk about a little bit more when I get to my thoughts about this story. And it is fundamentally a good old-fashioned haunted house story. Let's get into it. There aren't any dark beginnings to this story. There is no family trauma or deep dark past. Just a 19-year-old who had found himself with a good job and decided to buy himself and his partner a house. They weren't desperate to move. There were no extenuating circumstances. Just a guy who suddenly had money and wanted to invest it wisely. He found a lovely 3-bedroomed house in a nice part of Sheffield. William was excited about it. He went to see it prior to the official viewing, and it needed external work for sure. But on the official viewing, he realised that the inside was cosy, homely and well kept. It was just the external features that needed some work. William and his partner were ecstatic when their offer was accepted. Everything seemed so easy and straightforward. One night, William was going on a big night out with his friend Craig, and he couldn't resist taking a spin past the house to show his friend where the new chapter of his life was about to begin. William sat in the passenger seat, parked outside the house, pointing out rooms and flaws. See there? Yeah, that window is the sitting room, right? And then the one above it is the bedroom. I know, 3 bedrooms, although the third one is actually really small. And I know, the windows need to be replaced. Craig was squinting at the house, visibly looking confused. He turned to William and asked, "But who's the old lady in the bay window? Does she live there or what?" Try as he might, William couldn't see the old lady that Craig was talking about. He thought at first that maybe his pal was playing a prank on him. But Craig was insistent. She was a small old lady and looked to be in her 80s. She was wearing a dark coloured cardigan and a white blouse. She had short, grey, permed hair. And she did not look happy with Craig's souped-up car parked outside the house. It was a brief moment in the grand scheme of things, and William brushed it off as Craig trying to wind him up. But later, this moment would become more significant than he could have imagined. The house had been vacant for some time. The previous owners had purchased it for their elderly mother, but she had not taken to the house, and as a result it had laid empty. On the day that William had moved into the house, he had met the previous owners. They were in the process of moving the last few bits out. Nick was the previous owner's name, and his mother was there too, the woman who had refused to live in the house. They were both lovely people, full of chatter, and had done a lovely job getting the house ready for William's arrival. The older woman explained that the house had been built in the 1930s. It was a council house, and this woman had lived in it her whole life until she had passed away. As she told William the story, she moved closer to him, until eventually she practically whispered, "I only lasted 2 months here. Something just wasn't right." "Mum, give it a rest," Nick scolded with a laugh, and continued with the conversation. William didn't have time to ask what she meant, and what she had said only really registered with him when the conversation was over and they were long gone. What did she mean by something wasn't right? Did she mean that something was wrong with the house and it was too expensive to fix it maybe? Or maybe she meant something else. But what? But there was no time for that now, because that night William was having his first big night in the house with his friends. He was 19 and he owned this house. This 3-bedroomed palace was his and his alone, and he was so excited. It was December, so William had hastily bought a cheap Christmas tree that twinkled merrily in the corner of the living room, and Monopoly was laid out on the rug in the middle of the room, ready for a night of old-fashioned fun, with obviously as much alcohol as possible. 2 hours into the Monopoly game and things were intense. Accusations of cheating and money laundering were being liberally thrown around. And then, without warning, Greg shrieked and clambered over the board, knocking houses, hotels and drinks. The group shouted their exclamations of annoyance, but soon realised that Greg was now snow white and cowering against the wall. He was clearly terrified. They asked him what was wrong. Was he okay? Had he drank too much? But he refused to speak. Instead, remained pale-faced with fear, stammering about a woman. William half carried and half dragged him into the kitchen, where he propped him up against the sink and poured him a glass of water. Eventually the colour began to return to Greg's cheeks, and he was calm enough to be able to explain what he had seen that had caused his reaction. "How did you not see her? She was right there. I looked up and she was right there. It was an old woman, and she was sitting next to the Christmas tree. Except there was no chair. She wasn't sitting on a chair. She was just sort of hovering there like she was sitting on something. But there was nothing there. How did you not see her? She had grey hair and she was wearing a dark cardigan and a white shirt, and she was just sitting there, staring at me. Greg and Craig did not know each other, yet they had seen the same woman in the house. But no one else had seen her. Surely it must be just some weird coincidence. In the end, William and his partner split up and he ended up living with two of his good friends, and the house was joyous. They just worked together, and the lads came around on a regular basis to eat and drink and watch the football. It was on one of these days when all of the lads were around that they all witnessed a startling paranormal event. While some of the lads were sitting on the sofa drinking beers and watching the football, one end of the sofa rose up off the ground, hovered in the air, and then slammed back down onto the floor again. The group were absolutely baffled and spent the rest of the evening trying to understand what had happened. One of them vowed never to set foot in the house again, and he never did. It was around this time that the group lost one of its members. Their friend Dan died far too young, and it had a huge impact on all of the group. The country was in a deep recession, and while this was all happening, William moved out of the house for 8 months and only returned after Dan had passed away. He was hurting and lost, and on entering the house he felt as though there was something else in the house with him. A presence. He hoped that this presence was his friend Dan, coming from the other side to give him a sign. He sat on the sofa in the living room, feeling a bit stupid. He asked out loud to give him a sign. There was nothing, but the presence was still there. He could feel it. He took out his phone, an old Panasonic flip phone, and he said, "If you're here, you can show yourself in the camera." He took a picture of the room, scarcely daring to look at the resulting photograph. At first glance, there was nothing, and William felt simultaneously disappointed and relieved. But the closer he looked, he noticed there was something in the picture. Something dark. In the picture, he could see his own reflection in the black screen of the television. And next to him, there was a big, dark figure. A shadow. Clearly human in shape. Standing next to him as if posing for the picture. The years had passed and new guys had moved in and life was moving on as it does. On one of those long, lazy Saturday afternoons where the football was on and the laughter was flowing, William's brother suddenly jumped up from his seat and pointed at the living room door. He had seen a shadow pass slowly on the other side of the door. There was just enough light coming through the crack under the door to see the black mass pass by. The room stopped and held its breath as they listened to the heavy footsteps thump, 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 move away from the door and up the stairs. They heard the footsteps trudge across the hallway. They heard the creaky floorboard outside the bathroom door creak with the weight of someone, of something, whatever it was. They heard the squeak of the doorknob as it turned, and that something walked onto the tiled floor. The door slammed shut. There was much jostling back and forth as to who was going to go and investigate, and being the owner of the house, William drew the short straw. He made his way up the stairs holding his breath, shaking as he put his hand on the bathroom doorknob. The knob squeaked as he turned it, just as they had just heard. And the room was thankfully empty. He let out a sigh of relief. But the footsteps continued throughout the night. As time passed, William met a new girlfriend, Grace. They pulled up in a taxi one night after a night out, and Grace turned to William and grabbed his arm and said, "Who is the old woman in your bedroom window?" William couldn't see her. They would often hear noises in the house, the sounds of people walking around downstairs. One night, William went downstairs to investigate, and as he entered the living room, the television burst to life on full volume with a burst of static. One night, William left a pint glass on the sink. He had used it to have a drink before going to bed and replaced the glass on the sink when he was finished. The next morning at 7 a.m, he went downstairs to leave for work, and the pint glass was in smithereens, smashed to pieces. But the shards had all been swept up into a neat pile on the counter. There was not one shard of glass on the floor or anywhere else around the kitchen. Just one neat little pile on the sideboard. As time rolled on, more roommates came and went, including a roommate named Sadie. When Sadie moved in, they had a moving-in party, as was customary. It was a wonderful, raucous affair, and they had retired to bed eventually. When William awoke the next morning, he was feeling slightly worse for wear. He stumbled down the stairs, rubbing his temples, desperate for a glass of water, when he noticed that the front door was ajar. Shit! Had someone broken in? Did he leave the door open? No. One of their friends had crashed on the sofa, and he had heard his friend leave this morning and heard him slam the door shut. Shit. He opened the door and looked out, and Sadie's handbag and contents were strewn across the front yard. Shit. Sadie, get up, we've got a problem. But it was weird. When Sadie rushed downstairs, she very quickly realised that, yes, while her stuff was everywhere, violently flung around the pathway, there was nothing missing. Everything that had been in her handbag was very much there and accounted for. They were confused and decided that they needed to do a sweep of the house together. They sidled around from room to room, and there was nothing out of place that they could see, until they got to the kitchen. At the threshold of the kitchen, the knives that were usually in the knife block were stuck into the wooden floorboards. They were spaced equally apart, and the cupboard doors and drawers were all wide open. Again, nothing was missing. During all this time, William's brother Darren was a regular in the house. He would come over to visit and often came to stay after nights out. He was one of the people who had the experience of seeing an apparition in the house. It was after a night out, and he was standing in the kitchen, cracking open a beer, when he noticed something white outside the window in his peripheral vision. He turned his head, and it took him a few seconds to truly comprehend the white shape that seemed to be floating across the garden towards the window. It was a woman. An elderly woman, white and translucent. She looked Darren right in the eye before she turned and drifted straight through the wall of the neighbour's house. Darren didn't know how long he had stood there staring into the blackness of the world outside the window. But he had seen her. She was there. Translucent and white, she was there. All those who went in and out of the house agreed that the spirit in the house was that of Mrs. Tompkins, the previous owner who had died in the house, and that she was responsible for the strange things that were happening in the house. But there were things that Mrs. Tompkins didn't quite explain. A number of times, William and Grace awoke to hear footsteps and whispering, trudging around the outside of the house. Footsteps and whispering of more than one person. They would get up and check, and there would be nobody there. But they weren't the only ones to experience this. People who had stayed over in the house heard it too. At some points, they had assumed that someone was trying to break in, but no. The footsteps would walk up to the front door and then stop. They would disappear, like the owners of the footsteps had simply vanished into thin air. William's parents had a sheepdog named Guinness, and when they would go away on holidays, William would look after Guinness in the house. Guinness was a sweet and smart dog, and at night time she would lie across the top of the stairs as though she were protecting the house from intruders. This particular night had been an unsettling one. William was living alone at this point, and he had had a strange situation involving a lamp that insisted on lighting even when it was unplugged from the wall. He had spent the night feeling weird and unsettled as he had tried to understand how this was possible. He had even sent an electrician friend a selfie of him holding the lamp and the plug in his hand, and between them, they couldn't figure out how it was possible, because in the picture the lamp was clearly lighting. Lying in bed, he had eventually fallen asleep and was awoken by the sound of shuffling. He immediately recognised the sound as the sound of Guinness shuffling and wagging her tail when she was excited to see someone. This woke him up fully. There couldn't be anyone in the house, could there? And then he heard it.
Come here.
It was a gruff whisper. A man's whisper. And William's blood turned ice cold. There was someone in the house. It was a man. And the man was clearly trying to settle Guinness down to what? Rob the place, William assumed. He slowly pulled back the bed covers and as quietly as possible crept out of his bed and across the bedroom and slowly slid a golf club out of his golf bag. He was terrified, but he was ready to fight the intruder. But of course, there was no intruder. There was no one anywhere in the house. And now that William was living alone for the first time in years, Grace was at the house much more regularly, and for the first time she decided to spend the day alone in the house while William was out with his friends. She was watching Disney films and having a chilled day when she got up to go into the kitchen. And then she saw it. The woman. Pale and white, glowing in the back garden, staring at her through the window. At first, she thought that it might be her own reflection, but she soon realised that it just couldn't be. It was an old woman standing in the garden, staring in the window at her. In an absolute panic, she called William, begging him to come home. Eventually, Grace and her son Elliot moved into the house, and the house was fully refurbished. There were footsteps and shadows, but for the most part, the house was relatively quiet. Well, as quiet as a haunted house could be. Elliot was 14 years old, and Grace and William kept as much of the haunting a secret from him as possible. They didn't want to scare him. But that didn't stop him from having experiences. One day he bounded down the stairs. "What do you want?" Grace and William were blank-faced. "You called me when I was upstairs. What do you want?" Grace and William hadn't called him, so he shrugged and went back upstairs. When it happened again, he was more annoyed and insisted that someone had been calling his name from the staircase. The third time, he was more shook. Someone had been calling him from the staircase, but this time he had realised that the voice that was calling him was a man's voice, but it definitely wasn't William. During the COVID lockdowns, the family were spending far more time in the house and began to realise that there were regular thuds and knocking in the house too. Thumps and thuds would happen on the bedroom floor upstairs, which would reverberate into the downstairs living room. The knocks came in one thump or in twos and threes, and would be loud enough to hear over the television. One night, William and Grace turned off the television and, feeling kind of silly, William asked the question, "Please give 2 knocks if there is a spirit in the house." The 2 knocks came loud and clear. Strange things continued to happen in the house. Doors would open slowly and slam shut. And then there was the coin. A 2014 American 1-cent piece appeared in the middle of the bedroom floor. William was confused by it, but picked it up and put it on his dresser. That night when he went to bed, the coin was now back in the same place, in the middle of the floor. William was sure that no one in the house had touched it, but yet there it was in the middle of the floor again. This time he put it in a drawer. The next day the coin was in the middle of the staircase. And this time William put the coin into Grace's bedside locker. The next morning, while he was in the shower, he felt something ping against his calf. He knew before he even looked down that it would be the coin, and of course it was. This time he was alone in the bathroom having a shower, and somehow that coin had been thrown at him. He brought the coin back to Grace's bedside locker and realised that it wasn't the same coin. This was an American 1-cent coin, yes, but it was from 2012. The other one was gone. About a week later, William was having beers with his friends and he was telling them the coin story when his friend Douglas went pale. "Shit," he said. "You know when I was here last week fixing the boiler? Anyway, when I got home to put my work trousers in the wash, there was an American 1-cent coin in the pocket from 2014 and I could not figure out where it came from." As far as the book goes, that is the latest paranormal event that has happened in the house. William and his family still live there. And what interested me most about this story is that it's long and protracted. And the paranormal activity that happened lacked the Hollywood drama and seemed to happen in kind of relatively small and isolated incidents. Not all hauntings are intense and demonic. And it seems that there really are just some that you need to learn to live with. So like I said before we started this story, all of the information in this book came from the book The Lady in the Bay Window by William C. Grave. And in all fairness, all of the proceeds for the book go to the cancer hospice that looked after his mum. I think it's called Cavendish Cancer Care. So he very sadly lost his mum, and all of the money is donated to Cavendish Cancer Care. And I did have a little Google of William C. Grave and saw like a local newspaper reporting on him giving £30,000 to Cavendish Cancer Care, which I think, fair play to you. I also did reach out to William and he is more than happy to come on the podcast for an interview. So if you've got any questions that you would like me to put to William about his story, then you can do so by dropping them in an email, or if you're on Patreon, leave a comment underneath this and I can collate the questions in order to ask William. Also, there were another 2 chapters in this book which were about him getting paranormal investigative teams in and a psychic medium in and kind of comparing and contrasting their results. Now, you guys know I've got strong feelings about paranormal investigation teams, and I also have strong feelings about a lot of the gadgety bits that are used in kind of modern paranormal investigation. I just, you know. if somebody can explain to me exactly scientifically how a ghost is able to use one of those word machines to say particular words without saying, it's the energy, then I'll listen. But I've never gotten a particularly good explanation as to how all of these things work. And that's not to say I don't understand things like REM pods and cat balls and all of those things that work on movement and sensors. I understand those ones. But a lot of the other ones, I don't know. I don't have much time for. That doesn't, however, make those chapters any less interesting. And the book at the moment was free on Kindle Unlimited. So if that sounds like it's up your street, it's a nice, easy read. But besides all of that, I really liked the simplicity of this story. And there was a statistic that I saw recently, and it said that 1 in 5 British people believe their house is haunted, and 1 in 20 believe that their workplace is haunted. And to me, I was like, that seems like a huge number of people. But then I sort of thought, is that because I'm thinking of the Hollywoodized version of haunting, which is like demons and people being possessed and things being like flung around the place and it's all very dramatic, when actually the majority of haunted house stories are probably a lot slower and they're probably a lot more simplistic and probably a lot less Hollywoodized. Now, don't get me wrong, there are indeed stories where extreme things happen, and I don't think that those stories are not true. I just think they're the ones we hear about more than stories like this, where it happens over a long, protracted period of time. And a lot of the things that happen are small things, but there are also lots of witnesses. I do think it's really interesting too, going back to the very beginning of this story, that William didn't ever see the woman. And it feels like, I think her apparition appeared 5 times in total throughout this period of time. And it goes right up to the present day, but he has never seen an apparition of this woman. And I think it's really interesting that right back in the very beginning, when his friend Craig was like, who's the woman in the window? And William just couldn't see her. But the same thing happened with Grace after a night out. She could see this woman in the window and William wasn't able to see her. And I'm really curious as to what that means. Does that mean that the spirit, the entity, had some sort of control over who could see her and who couldn't? Did it mean that when William went into the house to view the house, that, I don't know, that the ghost, the entity, the old woman who was still residing there was like, no way, kiddo, you're not going to see me, but other people are? Is it a case that Craig and Grace maybe were more in tune with spiritual things without even realising it? And I wonder if the older woman who had lived there beforehand, the woman who lived there for 2 months or whatever, I wonder what she experienced. Did she experience noises? Did she see things? Like, was there more to it than simply, I just didn't feel right while I was living here? Like, were there more kind of substantive things that she had experienced rather than just a feeling? Not that that makes it any better. I don't mean just a feeling, as in that kind of negates the intensity of it, but I wonder if she had anything more concrete than feelings. And one of the things actually that I really liked about this book was that there was a huge amount of joy in the book, a huge amount of joy and life, and this 19-year-old man who has bought this house and is just so bloody happy to have a place for him and his friends to hang out. And the whole section where they're playing Monopoly in the living room honestly brought me such joy, because there was such a sense of like excitement, and there was no furniture or anything in the house, so they were all like having a sleepover in the living room with sleeping bags playing Monopoly, and I just thought it was so sweet. Because often in stories about haunted houses, there's also a lot of human trauma that happens, and maybe relations within the family aren't very positive. So I think it was 2 weeks ago I wanted to do a particular story, and actually part of the reason why I didn't do that story was because there was so much violence that happened within the family and so much darkness and negativity and oh, it was just so horrible to try and wade through. Whereas I was reading this and I was thinking, to be 19 again, and they're playing Monopoly and they're drinking and they're having poker nights and having a really good time and lots of good friendships and roommates coming and going and just lots of liveliness and joy and living that was happening in the house. And obviously, of course, there were moments within the story, like when their friend Dan passed away and during the recession, and there was negative stuff too. So it wasn't just a positive life, but still it was really overwhelmingly a happy existence in the house. And it made me think about the moments that this entity, this spirit, chose to make herself known. Like the moment when they're all sitting playing Monopoly and their friend Greg sees this woman sitting as though she's sitting on a chair, but she's just sort of perched, hovering on nothingness. Like, was that a time when she was like, I need to make myself known so they know that I'm watching them? Because this woman lived in her house from the time that she was, from the time that the house was built until the time that she died. And then all of a sudden, there's a whole crowd of rowdy young men in the house playing Monopoly and drinking. She must have been like, what the heck is going on? And equally, she showed herself to William's brother, who had come in from a night out and was, cracking a beer in the kitchen. And there was bits in the book about his relationship with his brother, which was, again, a positive relationship, but his brother liked to drink and he had difficulties in his marriage. And, I wonder if this older woman was showing herself to him to be like, I see you drinking in the house and showing up drunk, okay? And again, she showed herself to Grace, probably the first time Grace was alone in the house. And again, is it a case of, hey, this is my house, okay? I am the woman of this house, not you. Now, it might be none of those things, but I did find it very interesting that she did not show herself to William at any point. And really interestingly, I just paused recording there and was kind of absent-mindedly browsing on Facebook. And this book has a Facebook page, which is also called The Lady in the Bay Window. And it's just come up that the author was posting looking for a neighbour who had contacted them to say that they had lived across the road from the house and had known Mrs. Tompkins. And they had also seen her in the bay window after she had passed away. So obviously this was a thing that lots of people had seen, and maybe lots of people had seen it and not even realised that they were seeing an entity or a ghost or a woman who had passed away. But in regards to like the activity that happened in the house, a lot of footsteps, shadows, odd little poltergeist activities like the pint glass smashed into a neat pile. Here's the thing, the one I don't get is the bit with the knives. Right? So this girl called Sadie moves in. They're having the crack. They decide to have a moving in party for Sadie, and everyone's raucous and on the beer and having a good time. And then they did say that a friend of theirs stayed on the sofa. They had asked could they stay and leave in the morning. Absolutely fine. I think that's kind of standard in younger households. And they get up and all of Sadie's handbag and contents are like all strewn across the yard. And then the knives are all stuck into the floor across the threshold of the kitchen, equally apart. And this to me is probably the only thing in this story that feels actually threatening. Even the voice on the stairs, and I'm assuming, it didn't sound as deep and dark as I doctored it to sound in the episode. I like a bit of dramatic effect every now and then. And if the dog was wagging its tail and happy to see this person that wasn't a person, the person that wasn't there, I feel like that's a good indicator that it's probably not anything particularly bad or threatening. But in the moment, I understand why you'd be absolutely terrified. But the knives feels really threatening. And the fact that her handbag, which is something so personal to people, that the fact that her handbag was like strewn all out across the front yard also feels deeply personal. Is it possible that the guy who slept on the couch threw her handbag out everywhere and also stuck the knives into the floor? I think it would take a lot of force and energy probably to stick knives into a floor, and you'd probably hear the commotion, I think. And if we're to believe that he didn't have anything to do with it, which I believe William and Sadie didn't think he had anything to do with it, to me, it felt like this was particularly directed at Sadie, because it seems to be the only point where anything threatening happens. And actually, I don't think the tenancy or her living in the house, I don't think it ended on very good terms. It seems that it ended quite badly. So I wonder if it was like a warning, even to William, to be like, this girl is bad news. I don't like having this girl around the house. And that's why her handbag ended up out on the lawn and, you know, strewn across the pathway, and the knives were there because it was like, no, I mean business now. I actually don't like this girl being in the house. I mean, who knows? Maybe when you get to the other side, when you die, that you develop, you know, an intuition. If you come back and haunt, or you come back and see your old place, you can go, oh, you're a good person to have in the house, or oh, you are not a good person to have in the house. And obviously, clearly, this woman was very attached to the house and loved the house. But it also seems like she wasn't the only entity there. You know, you have this man's voice whispering, come here. You have hearing the sounds of people coming and going around the house, and the whispers of people coming and going. And then you've also got Elliot later hearing voices calling him. We've had that numerous times on the podcast, where people have heard voices calling their name throughout haunted houses. Is it possible there were two things going on here at once? That yes, it was indeed haunted by this woman who had lived there her whole life, but is it also possible that it was haunted by other people that had been in her life? Or is it a place where the veil is just a bit thinner? Either way, I thought it was a really good story, and a prime example of what happens when actually, hey, it's not extreme enough for us to leave, and this is my home and I want to stay here. And sometimes you just have to live alongside these things. And as I said before, if you've got any questions for William about his experience in this house, please do send them via email or drop a comment on Patreon if you're listening on Patreon. And also just to say a massive, huge thank you to everybody who has voted for the podcast in the British Podcast Awards. We have been shortlisted. I don't know if that's the right word, but we've been shortlisted in the top 20 so far, and the voting closes on the 29th of August. And I would really appreciate it if you could vote if you haven't voted already. I would really appreciate it. You can vote once per email address from anywhere in the world, and yeah, that would be amazing if you could do that. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. And if you would like to send in your story, you can do so by emailing it to reallifeghoststoriespodcast@gmail.com. You can also check out the website reallifeghoststoriespodcast.com. And if you are desperate for some extra content, you can subscribe to the Patreon. That is patreon.com/reallifeghoststories, where for $5 a month or $2 a month, you get access to heaps of extra content, as well as every single main and mini episode completely ad-free. And on that note, I shall see you next time.
To everyone else, this is a desk. But to you, it's a launch pad. Your starting block. This ain't a desk. This is opportunity.
Students who switch and save can get the Moto G5G on us at your local Boost retailer.
The Boost mobile network includes roaming coverage from partner networks, which cover 99% of the U.S. population. Moto G5G on us when you switch with ID verification and new $60 plan activation. Taxes extra. All prices, fees, features, functionality, and other offers are subject to change without notice. See participating dealers for details.